You hear the scream before you see anything. It's not the scream of a wounded man, it's the collective sound of 2,000 voices, realizing, in the same instant, that they're about to die. You're standing in a loose formation, bow in hand, but not yet strung. Watching your fellow archers frantically hammer wooden stakes into the ground, someone shouts about cavalry. You look up, and the horizon is moving. Not moving, charging. A wall of armored horses and French knights, close enough that you can see the mud flying from their hooves, and you have maybe 30 seconds before impact. Your hands shake as you try to string your bow, but there's no time. There's nowhere to run. The last thing you process is the thought that you've killed from a distance for 20 years, and now you're going to die at arm's length, trampled into French soil by the very knights you used to slaughter from 200 yards away. Before we dive deeper into this moment, I'd love to know, drop a comment, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. It genuinely amazes me that a battle from 1429 can connect us across continents like this. And if you're new here, stick around. This is a story about the most brutal reversal in medieval warfare. This is June 18, 1429, near a small village called Poitiers, about 50 miles northwest of Orleans. For 90 years, 3 full generations English longbowmen have been the nightmare that haunts every French knight's sleep. Since Crécy in 1346, the pattern has been predictable and devastating. French cavalry charges toward English positions, and before they close the distance, the sky darkens with arrows. Not dozens, thousands. Bodkin-tipped armor-piercing projectiles fired by men who've trained since childhood. Men whose left arms are overdeveloped and spines permanently curved from drawing 150-pound war bows. The French charge turns into a massacre every single time. At Agincourt 14 years earlier, 6,000 English soldiers faced 30,000 French and won decisively, killing over 7,000 Frenchmen, most of them nobility, in a muddy field where expensive armor became a death trap. The longbow had broken something in the French military psyche. French commanders had learned not to engage English archers in open battle. Survival meant avoiding combat entirely. But something fundamental has shifted in the past month. A 17-year-old peasant girl claiming divine visions has appeared with the French army. And somehow, whether through genuine faith or mass delusion, she's convinced French soldiers they can win. Joan of Arc's presence at Orleans sparked a series of improbable French victories that drove the English into retreat. Now French cavalry commanders are hunting for the withdrawing English army, and they're hunting for one specific thing: a chance to catch those longbowmen before they can deploy their defenses, because everyone knows the terrible secret that the English don't like to admit without preparation time. Without their planted stakes and formed lines, longbowmen are just lightly armored men with expensive sticks, vulnerable, killable, mortal. The English force retreating north consists of about 5,000 men, including 2,000 elite longbowmen under Sir John Fastolf and Lord Talbot, both veterans of Agincourt. They know the French are somewhere nearby, shadowing them, waiting. The English plan is textbook. Find defensible high ground. Plant the wooden stakes that will impale charging horses. Form the archers in overlapping lines, and let the longbows do what they've done for 9 decades. There's no reason to believe it won't work. This tactic has won every major battle in living memory. The French have 6,000 men pursuing them, including 2,000 heavy cavalry armored knights on powerful war horses, the kind of force that's been slaughtered repeatedly by English arrows. But French commanders Jean de Lincoln and La Hire are experienced veterans who understand the mathematics of medieval combat. Cavalry is useless against prepared longbowmen, but cavalry is absolutely devastating against unprepared infantry. If they can find the English and attack before the archers deploy, before those stakes get planted and those bowstrings get tied, they can turn invincibility into massacre. Speed is everything. The French send light cavalry scouts ranging ahead while the main force follows close behind, ready to charge the instant the English are located. Both armies are moving through wooded country north of the Loire Valley, playing a deadly game of hide-and-seek, where the stakes are the future of France itself. And then a deer changes history. The English advance guard, about 500 archers under Lord Talbot, is marching in column formation through woods near Poitiers, still searching for good defensive terrain, when a stag bolts through their ranks. Soldiers shout and cheer as the animal passes, a brief moment of entertainment during a tense retreat. It's the kind of small, random moment that seems meaningless until you realize French scouts are in those same woods close enough to hear. They hear the shouting. They immediately understand what it means. The English are right there, and they're still in marching formation. Not deployed, not ready. The scouts race back to the main French army. The commanders process the information in seconds and give the order that will reverse a century of military history. Attack immediately before the English can prepare. Every French knight has been waiting for this moment, this chance, since Agincourt, since Crécy, since their fathers and brothers died helplessly under English arrows. Now they're going to find out what English archers look like up close. Lord Talbot's advance guard reaches a small rise near Poitiers and Talbot. An experienced commander immediately grasps the danger when he sees French cavalry in the distance. He barks orders, and his archers begin frantically deploying hammering stakes into the ground, forming lines, stringing their bows. This is the defensive procedure that has protected English archers for generations. Each man carries a 6-foot sharpened stake that gets planted at an angle, creating a fence of wooden spikes that will impale charging horses. But the procedure takes time, 15, maybe 20 minutes for proper deployment. Talbot's men have maybe 5 minutes before contact. You can see the panic spreading through the English ranks as reality sets in. Some archers are still trying to plant stakes, driving them into the earth with desperate strength. Others fumble with their bowstrings, fingers shaking with adrenaline and fear. A few veterans men who've survived enough battles to recognize certain death when they see it simply start running toward the tree line, preferring to die in flight than be trampled. Talbot is shouting orders, trying to impose some kind of defensive formation, but his voice is lost in the growing thunder of 2,000 armored horses at full gallop. The ground is shaking. The French cavalry is covering the final distance, lances lowered, and there's nothing between them and the archers except empty air and broken prayers. The impact is apocalyptic. French knights on armored war horses crash into the scattered, half-prepared English archers at full speed. Lances punch through bodies with such force that men are lifted off their feet, carried backward on the shaft for several feet before the wood splinters, and they fall to be trampled. Horses weighing 1,000 pounds in armor bowl over multiple archers at once, their steel-shod hooves coming down on chests and skulls with sickening crunches. The sound is overwhelming, screaming men and screaming horses, the crack of breaking lances, the wet percussion of bodies being crushed into the mud, the metallic ring of swords on helmets. Archers who have spent entire careers killing from 200 yards away are suddenly in hand-to-hand combat with armored knights, and the mismatch is brutal. Longbowmen carry only small sidearms daggers, short swords completely useless against men, in full plate armor wielding warhammers and longswords. The English line disintegrates in minutes. Those who can run do, throwing down their precious longbows and fleeing into the forest. But most are trapped, surrounded by cavalry with no escape route. French knights are cutting them down from horseback, swords cleaving through the light leather armor that archers wear for mobility. One chronicler will later describe archers being literally split in half by overhead sword strikes from mounted knights. Others are trampled by horses that keep charging through the mob hooves, crushing men who are already down. Some archers try to surrender, dropping their weapons and raising empty hands. But the French knights are in a killing frenzy after decades of humiliation. They keep killing, avenging every French noble who died on English arrows, avenging Agincourt, avenging their fathers. Lord Talbot tries to organize a fighting retreat with his small group of mounted men-at-arms, but they're overwhelmed within minutes. Talbot himself is knocked from his horse and captured, his life spared only because he's worth a substantial ransom. Around him, the advance guard is being annihilated. Bodies of archers litter the field, showing the distinctive injuries of close combat split skulls. Severed limbs, bodies trampled flat into the mud until they're barely recognizable as human. The expensive longbows that made these men the most feared soldiers in Europe lie scattered and useless in the grass. Not a single English arrow has been fired in anger. The main English army, still marching about a mile behind, hears the sounds of slaughter and tries desperately to deploy. Sir John Fastolf commands this larger force of about 1,500 longbowmen and 3,000 men-at-arms. These soldiers have time to prepare. They frantically begin planting stakes and forming battle lines on a small hill. But they can see what's happening to their advance guard, can see French cavalry cutting down their fellow archers like wheat, can see that the invincibility they've relied on for their entire military careers is a lie that only works when you have time and distance. Morale is already shattered before the French cavalry even reaches them, and the French cavalry, fresh from destroying the advance guard and with blood up, charges the main position before deployment is complete. The partially prepared defenses slow the charge but can't stop it. French knights crash through the incomplete stake line, horses jumping or pushing through the obstacles, striking down at archers from above. More brutal close-quarters fighting erupts across the hilltop. Archers swing their longbows like clubs in desperate self-defense, but they're fighting men in full armor on horseback. Some manage to draw their sidearms, but a dagger is a pathetic weapon against a knight in plate armor. Knights are grabbing archers by the throat and lifting them off their feet to stab them through icelets or under the chin. Warhammers are caving in skulls through leather caps. The hill becomes a slaughterhouse painted in English blood. Sir John Fastolf makes a decision that will haunt his reputation forever. Seeing the battle is lost, he flees with his mounted retinue, abandons the infantry and archers to their fate, and gallops north with a few hundred mounted men-at-arms, hoping to preserve some fighting force. Behind him, the remaining English soldiers are being systematically destroyed. Small groups of archers try to form defensive circles, but French cavalry simply ride them down. Individual archers running for the woods are hunted and killed like animals. The battle has devolved into a massacre, then into a hunting expedition. The killing continues for nearly 20 minutes after the main English line breaks. Pockets of resistance are crushed one by one. The forest near Poitiers becomes a killing ground where French cavalry hunt down fleeing archers through the trees. Men who spent careers killing from hundreds of yards away die in confused melees in the underbrush, stabbed in the back while running, or simply trampled by horses. Some climb trees trying to hide, only to be pulled down and killed. For the first time in 3 generations, French knights are completely dominating English longbowmen, and they show no mercy. When the slaughter finally ends, over 2,000 English soldiers lie dead on the field and in the surrounding woods. The vast majority are longbowmen, the elite archers, who've been. Their bodies tell the story of what happens when distance weapons meet close combat. Crushed skulls, severed limbs, puncture wounds from lances, and the distinctive injuries of being trampled, broken bodies compressed into the mud. Many still clutch their useless bows. The few who managed to fire arrows before being overrun achieved nothing. The French cavalry had been too close, moving too fast. The longbow's dominance had always been predicated on distance and preparation. At Poitiers, the English had neither. French casualties are minimal, perhaps a few dozen killed or wounded. The battle has been so one-sided it barely qualifies as combat. More like an execution. French knights stand on the field, surrounded by thousands of dead Englishmen, struggling to process what they've just accomplished. For the first time since the 100 Years' War began, almost a century earlier, France has decisively defeated England in open battle. The invincible English army has been broken. The unstoppable longbowmen have been slaughtered like cattle. The psychological impact radiates through both armies like a shockwave. For French soldiers, it's revelation and redemption. The English aren't invincible. The longbow isn't invincible. And if you catch them unprepared, they die just like anyone else. For the English, it's the nightmare scenario they've never had to confront. What happens when the weapon you've relied on for 3 generations fails? What happens when the distance collapses and you have to fight up close? Joan of Arc, who rode with the main army during the battle, attributes the victory to divine intervention. The soldiers are inclined to believe her. The treatment of prisoners reveals the depth of hatred that's accumulated over decades of French defeats. But many common English soldiers captured at Poitiers are simply executed on the spot. French soldiers who lost family at Agincourt or Crécy take personal revenge. Some English prisoners are forced to kneel in rows and beheaded one after another. Others are beaten to death by men who've waited years for this moment. The rules of chivalry that usually protect. Prisoners don't fully apply when you're avenging 90 years of trauma and humiliation. Only high-ranking nobles like Talbot are spared, not from mercy, but because they're worth more alive than dead. Within weeks of Poitiers, the entire English position in France begins to collapse. French soldiers, who'd been terrified to fight, suddenly become aggressive. English garrisons that felt secure suddenly feel vulnerable. The psychological shift is as important as the military victory. French commanders learn the lesson of Poitiers and adapt their tactics, stop attacking prepared English positions. Focus on rapid movement and surprise attacks, deny the archers time to deploy. Within 2 months, Charles VII is crowned King of France at Rheims Cathedral with Joan of Arc standing beside him, a ceremony that would have been impossible without Poitiers opening the road to Rheims and proving French armies could defeat the English. Over the next 23 years, France gradually pushes England out of all its continental territories except Calais. The 100 Years' War, which seemed to be ending in complete English victory, instead ends with French triumph. Poitiers is the turning point, the moment when 90 years of English dominance reversed in 6 minutes of brutal cavalry charges. There's an inventory list that survives in French archives from the aftermath of Poitiers, recorded by a clerk whose job was to catalog captured English equipment. He lists hundreds of longbows, thousands of arrows, stakes still bundled for planting, and then he writes something that doesn't belong in a military inventory. He writes, "The bows were beautiful, perfectly carved. Some had names carved into them. We burned them all." It's a strange detail to include in an official document, but it captures something essential about what Poitiers meant. The longbow had been more than a weapon. It had been a symbol of English supremacy, a technological advantage that seemed to make them unbeatable. And at Poitiers, all those beautiful bows lay useless in the mud while their owners died screaming, unable to use them, helpless against the very cavalry they'd been slaughtering for generations. The weapons that won Crécy and Agincourt became kindling. The archers who thought themselves invincible learned in their final moments what it felt like to die afraid and defenseless. The reversal was complete. The nightmare had changed sides, and France, reborn in the blood of English archers, remembered.